and welcome to News at 10 on Rajya Sabha television. My name is Aishwarya Kapoor. Well, Bharat Bandh is going to be our top focus. Nationwide, trade Modi will engagement in oil exploration. This will be the first prime ministerial visit to Vietnam in 15 years after former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited the country in 2001.
Defense and security cooperation with Vietnam is very robust, and it includes areas including counterterrorism, transnational crimes. And in defense cooperation, our focus has been on capacity building and training in high-level exchanges and, more recently, in defense procurement.
This is the venue where Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with his entire delegation, will be staying. Security has been heightened, and there's excitement on the streets of Vietnam to see Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Remember, this visit is significant in the sense that it is the first visit by any Indian Prime Minister in the last 15 years. It's a celebration of the long-standing diplomatic and the cultural ties between the two nations. This visit is not only about the bilateral talks, but is also about establishing largely the strategic importance of India in Southeast Asia, especially when it comes close on the heels of the recent ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration.
The Prime Minister will then head to China on 3rd of September to attend the annual G20 in Hangzhou on 4th and 5th of September. At the summit, India is likely to see concrete measures to check terror financing and crack down on tax evasion. On the sidelines of the summit, Modi will also hold a bilateral meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Our priorities at this G20 summit are going to be the cross-border mobility of professionals, particularly in services, the reduction in remittance costs, overseas Indians, poverty eradication, moderation in consumption and more sustainable lifestyles, and improved technology access, particularly for renewables and post-harvest agriculture activities.
The Prime Minister will return to India on 5th of September and leave for Laos on a 2-day visit to attend the 14th India-ASEAN Summit and the 11th East Asia Summit on 7th and 8th of September. At the India-ASEAN Summit, Prime Minister Modi and ASEAN leaders will review India-ASEAN cooperation and discuss its future direction under each of the 3 pillars of political security, economic and socio-cultural cooperation. With Akhilesh Suman, this is Neelu Vyas's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
In fact, my colleague Neelu Vyas Thomas is now joining us live from Hanoi. Neelu, now Prime Minister Modi is travelling to Vietnam, the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister in the last 15 years. What do you think is the significance of this visit, especially coming before 2 big multilateral summits? Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit is the first trip of any Indian Prime Minister in the last 15 years. So this visit is not only about the bilateral talks, but also about establishing India's presence, the strategic presence in Southeast Asia. Now, what one has to understand is that this visit also has a symbolic significance because Prime Minister Narendra Modi is making a brief stopover at Vietnam before he heads for 2 important multilateral summits, that is G20 in China and Laos for the ASEAN summit. So it certainly has a symbolic significance. There is a certain signal which is sent out to China in very subtle terms. Now, one has to understand the fact that India and Vietnam are on the same page when it comes to the respect for international laws, freedom of navigation and dispute in the South China Sea. Now, we cannot discount the fact that recently the Permanent Court of Arbitration had disqualified China's claims to the historic rights in the South China Sea. So basically, India is trying to send out a message in very subtle terms that, look, India and Vietnam are very close friends and India will do all it can to give military support to Vietnam to augment its military capabilities. So that is one very important message, but in very subtle terms, because both the countries are trying to avoid any kind of reaction from Beijing at this moment. Neelu, now defense is a very important part of Indo-Vietnam relations. Now, under the 100 million line of credit extended by India earlier to Vietnam, is there any likelihood of any contract be signed during this visit? 2014, when the Vietnamese Prime Minister was in India, India had agreed to extend $100 billion line of credit to Vietnam, and especially to augment the military capabilities, the military efficiency of Vietnam. Now, what we are told at the moment is that under the contracts which are going to be signed tomorrow, it's going to be a brief visit, a very compact day during which some important contracts will be signed, and that is regarding the signing of the contract regarding the 4 patrol boats which are to be given to Vietnam. What we are told, not very directly, is that perhaps there could be some forward movement on the BrahMos missile, yes, which India has agreed to give it to Vietnam. Yes. So basically these are the contracts which are likely to come up during the brief meeting tomorrow, and also there are likely to be talks on trade, on how to boost the investment coming in from Vietnam. Now one has to understand that Vietnam is India in fact is one of the top trading partners of Vietnam after Singapore. So obviously boosting the investment, boosting the trade ties with Vietnam is equally important, along with boosting the strategic ties.
All right, Anidu, thank you so much for all those details there. So important visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi there, even as Vietnam has said that Indian Prime Minister's visit will open a new page in bilateral relations. Well, let's move on in the bulletin now. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has called for strengthening anti-terror ties with India. Well, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj called on the visiting Egyptian President on Thursday. Al-Sisi will meet the President and the Vice President today. He will also talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has conveyed to India that he wants to take anti-terror cooperation between the two countries to a whole new level. He pitched for strong collective action against radicalization. Al-Sisi, who arrived in India on Thursday on a 3-day visit, said this after External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj called on him. Swaraj conveyed that the visit provided an opportunity to upgrade security ties and anti-terror cooperation between the two countries. She mentioned the need for early finalization of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism at the UN. The Egyptian president also met US Secretary of State John Kerry, who has extended his stay in India. The two leaders discussed key bilateral issues besides the situation in the Middle East during the late-night meeting. The Egyptian president is scheduled to hold talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi to step up agreement in areas of security, counter-terrorism and trade. Both sides are also expected to sign a number of MOUs. The leaders are expected to deliberate on ways to effectively deal with the menace of terrorism. Pakistan's actions in helping the spread of terrorism across the neighborhood is also expected to be discussed at the meet.
They have to look at the issue that Jammu and Kashmir, YCBC, that has no local stand-by, absolutely, it's an internal matter, and they appreciate that. So, of course, they take a public posture, but what they tell us privately, there is a slight gap, and we would like that what they tell us publicly, privately, they also tell this publicly and take a stand.
President al-Sisi will also hold bilateral talks with his counterpart President Pranab Mukherjee and Vice President Mohammad Hamid Ansari. India and Egypt share a strong economic relationship. The Egyptian president's visit is expected to cement the relations. Akhilesh Suman's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, let's move on in the bulletin. The government late last night suspended 4 Home Ministry officials for allegedly facilitating the renewal of FCRA license of an NGO promoted by Islamic preacher Zakir, against whom several probes are now on. Those are suspended are 2 undersecretaries and 1 section officer. Well, the action was taken after the Home Ministry found that Naik's NGO, Islamic Research Foundation's FCRA license, was renewed recently despite several ongoing probes, including one by it. Well, Minister of State for Home Kiran Rijiju tweeted to inform about the decision, saying the action against 2 undersecretaries and 1 section officer was due to their negligence in clearing the renewal, while a case is still pending, unquote. In News at 10, we'll take a very short break. Up next, more news. Stay with us.
Mercury or lead. So these are actually soft acid. When they goes into the body and it damages your protein and enzymes in every tissues. So you should have some drug that can actually detoxify these heavy metals in your body. So we are focusing on level of discovery of drug.
Watch Eureka with Dr. Gauri Prasanna Roy, Assistant Professor, Department of Chemistry, Shiv Nadar University, only on Rajya Sabha TV.
Welcome back. Now, the government will seek a presidential assent for the landmark Constitution Amendment Bill for the GST, as the 16 states have already ratified the legislation, with Odisha on Thursday becoming the 16th state to ratify the GST Bill. 50% of the states have now ratified the bill. Now, the government plans to roll out the new indirect tax regime from 1st of April next year. The GST will create a uniform market for seamless movement of goods and services with one tax rate. Well, after the presidential assent, the government will notify the GST Council. Union Finance Minister will head the council, which will comprise state finance ministers. The GST Council will decide on the tax rate, the cess and surcharges, which are to be subsumed, and also decide on the goods and services which would be exempted from the purview of the new indirect tax regime.
It's unfair to tax people to collect more than what is necessary for running the country. So you must have an optimum collection which is adequate to run the country. You shouldn't tax people more. Because excessive taxation can also lead to unfairness of the citizens.
And now a look at the flood situation across several states of the country. Well, with 4 more deaths on Thursday, the death toll in Bihar floods has risen now to 172. The swirling waters of the Ganges have inundated 12 districts of the state. However, the water level of the Ganga receded at Digha Ghat, Gandhi Ghat and Munger, but the river was flowing above the danger mark at Hatida, Sahibganj and Farakka. More than 37 lakh people have been affected by the floods at different parts of the state so far. Meanwhile, in Assam, 4 members of a family were washed away in a landslide triggered by heavy rains and floods near Silchar. 7 more houses were also washed away by the heavy rains in a nearby village. Now, the NDRF, police and civil officials have launched a rescue operation for the affected people. Meanwhile, in Jammu and Kashmir, incessant rains and landslides on Thursday blocked the 300-kilometer-long Jammu-Srinagar National Highway. Several vehicles were stranded in the landslide hit area. Now, efforts are on to clear the highway. Men and machinery have been employed, and those who were building the Chennai Tunnel on the highway have also been pressed into service. And now a look at what all events are slated for the day in the day ahead. The Supreme Court will hear Tamil Nadu government's plea seeking release of 50,000 million cubic feet of water from Karnataka to meet its irrigation demands in the backdrop of the Kaveri water row. The plea also seeks the court's intervention to ensure that Karnataka adheres to the stipulated water releases in accordance with the 2007 order of the tribunal for the remaining months, starting from 20th of August in the irrigation year of 2016-17. The Supreme Court will also hear the Delhi government's civil suit seeking a declaration that the capital is a state, and it's a petition against the order of the High Court, which held that the city is a union territory with Lieutenant Governor as its administrative head. Earlier on 4th of August, Delhi High Court had held that AAP government's contention that Delhi LG was bound to act on the advice of Council of Ministers was without substance. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee will leave for a week-long visit to Germany and Rome to attend Mother Teresa's canonization ceremony and meet potential investors. The Trinamool Congress Supremo has already clarified that she is not part of the central government's official delegation to the Vatican City for the ceremony on Sunday, but is going as a guest of Kolkata-based Missionaries of Charity, which was founded by Mother Teresa. Well, on to some international news now. In New Zealand, people living in coastal areas of the North Island were temporarily ordered to evacuate due to fears of a tsunami after a severe earthquake at sea. Now, the magnitude 7.1 quake struck at 5 a.m. local time at a depth of 55 kilometers, 170 kilometers of northeast of Gisborne. Now, residents across North Island said that they felt shaking and rattling as the quake struck, but there were no immediate reports of serious damages. Authorities said that while quake caused tsunami, only an 8-inch wave has been measured. Now, as the quake struck, people in and around the town of Gisborne, the largest populated area near the epicenter, were told to go to higher areas or go as far inland. The evacuation order and tsunami warning were later lifted a few hours later. Now, authorities in Gisborne said that people could return home, but they were strongly advised to stay off the beaches. Each year, more than 15,000 earthquakes are recorded in New Zealand, but only about 150 of them are large enough to be felt. And fighting has escalated in Syria. In the central province of Hama, Syrian government warplanes are reported to have bombed several areas in response to a major rebel offensive. The rebels have captured at least 14 villages in the last 4 days, prompting heavy government airstrikes. Both the Russian and Syrian jets were involved in strikes. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that the rebel offensive was the biggest coordinated operation in Hama province since 2014. It added that at least 25 civilians had been killed in the overnight strikes, including 6 children. However, government media said that the concentrated airstrikes were against the terrorists, adding that tens of them had been killed. Now, with Hama province being of vital strategic importance, the rebel push here marks a new challenge for President Assad and his allies. Meanwhile, the United Nations has said that while it was hopeful of an agreement on a broad ceasefire in Syria, as discussions continue between officials from Russia and the US, it also expressed concern over the humanitarian crisis there.
Aleppo is one of the areas where we are ready to go immediately when there is a 48-hour pause. We're still negotiating the access road and the modalities of this, including with the armed opposition groups. It's urgent that we get an agreement. We were informed today that there are now 4,000 food rations left. That would be enough for 20,000 people, and the population of East Aleppo is 250,000. I'm hopeful that we will have a breakthrough.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, hundreds of demonstrators were arrested after clashes erupted between opposition protesters and police on Thursday. The opposition Democratic Union coalition supporters flooded Venezuela's capital to press for a recall referendum this year against unpopular socialist President Nicolas Maduro. The protesters blamed the president for the country's deep economic crisis and accused the Electoral Commission of deliberately delaying a referendum that could shorten his stay in power.
Y transformarla en oportunidad para que la nación pueda decir su palabra. Es preciso convocar una consulta y tal consulta tiene nombre y apellido. Su nombre es referendo y su apellido es revocatorio.
And in Europe, Spain's political crisis continues with the caretaker Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy set to face a second-round confidence vote today. However, having lost the first-round vote on Wednesday, 180 to 170, he is not expected to win the second-round vote either, at which he now requires only a simple majority. Rajoy will give a 10-minute introductory speech, after which the spokespersons from other parties will be allowed 5 minutes each to reply. Now, if Rajoy loses the second-round vote as well, it increases the likelihood of a third election within a year. The stalemate has left the country without a full-fledged government that stretches into its 9th month after general elections in December and June both failed to produce a conclusive result. Earlier, Rajoy had warned members of the Congress that a failure to install him as the Prime Minister would threaten Spain's economic recovery. And now the latest from the US Open. Well, defending champion Serena Williams cruised into the third round of the tournament with a 6-3, 6-3 victory over fellow American Vanya King. With this win, Serena reached another milestone in her illustrious career, earning her 306th career win at a Grand Slam. Now, her sister and world number 6, Venus Williams, also won her second-round match against Germany's Julia Georges 6-2, 6-3, and she also advanced into the third round. Meanwhile, 2011 US Open champion Australia's Samantha Stosur lost her second-round match to China's Shuai Zhang 6-3, 6-3. And in the men's singles, Britain's Andy Murray beat Spain's Marcel Granollers to reach the third round of the tournament. Murray seeded second, won the match in straight sets, 6-4, 6-1, 6-4.
More from Andy carving up Granolliers. Now remember, there's a rain delay throughout the ground.
Well, that's it from me and my team in this edition of news. Thanks so much for your time.